Last week, I talked about the idea of the cult of sensibility in the 18th century. And today, I want to talk a little bit about why that idea of sensibility was somewhat controversial at the time. Just to recap, in the 18th century, texts like Lawrence Stern's A Sentimental Journey and Henry Mackenzie's The Man of Feeling popularized the idealization of the capacity for strong emotional response to the feelings of others. As we discussed, the idea was that this was supposed to promote benevolence, that if you felt strongly about other people, you would care about them and you would do more to help them. So as we saw last week, Barbauld's A Mouse's Petition is a good example of this kind of idealization of sensibility. However, some critics attacked sensibility on the grounds that it really did not accomplish the benevolent aims that it claimed for itself. They said it really didn't hold good in practice, and very often that it functioned to, in fact, stultify practical responsibilities to suffering rather than actually encouraging improvement of the world. From the critic's point of view, sensibility was more about the individual who could then feel good about being such a caring person. And once they felt good about themselves, they didn't actually need to act upon those feelings. It was as if the feelings themselves were the good and not what could be accomplished from them. So, for example, they said a rich lady could ride by a beggar in the street and burst out into tears about his wretched condition without stopping to think what she could do to alleviate it. The controversy over sensibility reached its height right around the time of the French Revolution. Uh, Part of the reason here is that revolutionaries were made synonymous, at least by certain parties in England, the conservative factions. Uh, Revolutionaries were made synonymous with the man of sensibility. So critics of sensibility pointed at the revolution and said, "Look, here are people who had so much sympathy with the poor, beggars, the disenfranchised in their country that they have gone to unreasonable and violent lengths in response." And even supporters of the idea of sensibility and political radicals, people like Henry Mackenzie, whose Man of Feeling is one of the originary texts of sensibility, or Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a radical feminist thinker of the period, turn against the idea of sensibility precisely because of its potential for excess. In other words, sensibility was accused of being the height of hypocrisy. You could feel sorry for the most insignificant little animal while cutting off the head of a king. And of course, that's a kind of specious logic, but it had a powerful sway amongst English conservatives, condemning those who would support the revolution as being hypocrites in this way. Just to give an example of this, this is a famous cartoon from the Anti-Jacobin Review in 1798. It pictures at the far right of your screen a figure of sensibility who is weeping over a dead bird, while you can see is also standing, trampling on a severed head. She looks a bit like a zombie and is carrying a book of Rousseau. Rousseau being one of the French philosophers who is said to have inspired the French Revolution. So to sum up, sensibility became rather unpopular. Both radicals and conservatives wanted to distance themselves from it, even as both continued to use powerful emotive language to support their causes. One of the most famous examples of this is Edmund Burke in Reflections on the Revolution in France, painting a picture of Marie Antoinette being torn from her bed by these vulgar revolutionaries, positioning her much like the innocent heroine in a novel, and basically trying to make his readers feel badly for her. So he's cultivating sensibility even as he's criticizing it. So as we'll see in this course, many Romantic writers are working to, on the one hand, vindicate the idea of emotion and feeling, but on the other hand, avoiding risking association with the negative connotations of those ideas. In other words, they're looking to rehabilitate the idea of feeling, but doing so in a way that appears more rational and measured, rather than excessive and taken to extremes. So, for example, the novels of Anne Radcliffe, also written in the 1790s, at the time of the French Revolution, are full of trembling, fainting heroines, feeling sensibility for all their fellow sufferers. But at the same time, in Radcliffe's novels, there's always an undercurrent of practical morality. The heroines learn that action needs to accompany sympathy. They need to help others. And when later in the Romantic period we come to Jane Austen and her famous novel Sense and Sensibility, sensibility in that novel is clearly a problem. The sister who embodies sensibility falls in love too easily with a man who turns out to be unworthy of her and deserts her, and this causes her extremes of suffering. So we'll see this kind of thing also in the Romantic poets, that feeling on the one hand is good, but it has to be channeled in the right way, and we must always be careful of giving in to excesses of feeling.